Chapter 27. It was early morning in the first part of the day. The sun was just coming up. Bruce sat at his morning breakfast table. The newspaper was in front of him. His black silk monogrammed dressing gown barely concealed the rippling muscles of his chest and back. You could tell he had not shaved yet from the dense yet attractive forest of blonde stubble on his cleft chin and sculpted cheeks. He rubbed his aquiline nose. Then, when he reached up to push the soft blonde hair back from his manly forehead, his hand encountered the bandages, still there. He frowned, the gesture making ripples of thought on his brow between the limpid blue pools that were his eyes. "I must remember what happened," he told himself sternly, his deep, resonant voice trembling huskily with emotion. He still could not recall anything about the automobile accident that had sent him to the hospital with a severe head injury, that the bandage on his head now covered the 18 sutures that a top-notch surgeon at St. Ivan's Hospital had spent so long in carefully suturing into his brow. He tried and tried until sweat popped out on the smooth skin of his forehead and glistened there, but he could still not remember a damn thing. Damn it! He had to. He just had to. "Meow," said the neighbor's cat at the window. It was not Bruce's cat, but sometimes he let it in and fed it. It was a very expensive purebred Siamese. Had the cat but known it, his blue eyes were exactly the same shade of the limpid blue pools that were Bruce's eyes. "Go away!" shouted Bruce, his despair and confusion making him uncharacteristically grumpy with the cat that he sometimes fed and petted. "Just leave me alone!" But an instant later he regretted his temper. He opened the window and let the cat in. He found some milk for it in the refrigerator and carefully chopped up some leftover cooked chicken livers and a few sardines in a can that was in there. The cat purred while he ate it. "Would that I could be as sublime as you, a small feline friend," Bruce said wearily, sadly, depressedly.
"Would that it were so simple."
He petted the cat a few times and then went back to his chair. He sat down on it. Outside the window it was morning. The sun was just coming up. The wind was blowing sweetly through the Georgia pines. He thought for just a moment how lucky he was to live in Atlanta, Georgia, in the southern part of the United States.
Halifax is in Nova Scotia, which is in Canada, which is on Earth, which is in Canada.
Suddenly Bruce's eyes fell on the newspaper on the table in front of him. The headlines seemed to shriek at him. "Millionaire industrial Henry Archer dead at age 60! Tragic car accident claims his life! Callie Archer now without!"
Henry! Oh my God!
His eyes crawled frantically over the newspaper, devouring the awful and confusing details of the death. The reporter had written a good but a gristly report on the millionaire's death. Bruce cringed as he read of the bright star of blood on the shattered windshield where Henry Archer's head had smashed against it. The reporter noted that the man's body still gripped a cell phone in one lifeless hand after he was dead. Had he been talking on the phone when he died? Bruce hated it when drivers in other cars talked on the phone when they were driving. It was certainly a dangerous and rude practice. Perhaps Henry Archer's death had been the result of his own rudeness and carelessness in driving while talking on a cell phone. Then his eyes were suddenly trapped like wolves in jaw traps. One single detail from the newspaper article seized him by the throat and squeezed like a noose around his neck. It was the date and time of the accident. 4:03 p.m. on July 20th. "No! It can't be!" Bruce shouted the words. He stood up from his chair. The Siamese neighbor's cat jumped in terror. "Meow!" it cried piteously. "Meow! Meow!" "I'm sorry, Pitty Pat," Bruce apologized to the Siamese cat. "I didn't mean to startle you, but I think that Henry Archer's accident happened at the same date and time that mine did. Oh, look at me. What am I coming to? Talking to a cat. I'm a successful software developer, not some kind of crazy man. Aren't I?" He stood up from his chair. He paced around the room. Then he made himself go to his leather monogram briefcase and take out the doctor's report from his hospitalization. His eyes slid swiftly down the papers, then suddenly snagged on the very information he sought. There it was! The doctor had written down that the emergency medical people from the ambulance that brought him to the hospital had thought that his accident had probably happened at 4:03 p.m. on July 20th. The very same day and time that Henry Archer's accident had happened. He exclaimed, "It has to be a coincidence! It just has to!" Bruce shouted. Then he made himself calm down. He walked back to his kitchen table and sat down. He looked at the newspaper there. The bloody, tragic headlines still screamed that unimaginable news up at him. Below the big print of the large headline was a society photo of Henry Archer and his wife Callie Archer. Callie was in a breathtaking lace evening gown by Christian Dior. Beside her, looking stricken by his wife's breathtaking beauty, was Henry Archer, in an impeccable black tuxedo by Ralph Lauren and a white shirt and black tie. Even covered by a tuxedo, Bruce could see that Henry Archer had still the muscular body of the bodybuilder he had once been, but was no more, now that he was 60 years old. Diamonds glittered on an immense pendant at Callie Archer's throat. Diamonds bigger than pearls hung from her earlobes, shining like soft icicles. Well, at least she will have a lot of money now that he is dead. At least she isn't left poor and destitute, pushing a shopping cart down the street and living in a cardboard box in an alley and eating leftover McDonald's food from a dumpster. At least there's that to be thankful for. Then the coincidence of the times of death hit him all over again. Can there be a connection? He had to ask himself. Meow, said Pitty Pat, his soulful blue eyes shining up at Bruce. The cat seemed to want to help him. Cats are naturally sympathetic animals, and Pitty Pat was no exception. He could see that the big, muscular human who sometimes fed him chicken gizzards and salmon was distressed. His little heart went out to the man. Meow, he said again softly. Bruce stooped down and petted the cat. I know you want to help. Cats are naturally sympathetic animals. I just don't think there's any way you can help me, little fellas. I have to do this myself. I have to find out the details of my car accident. I have to remember exactly what happened to me that day. I'm the only one who can do it, Pitty Pat! The only one. Bruce decided to get dressed. First he would take a shower, being very careful of the bandage on his 12 stitches that now seamed his forehead. He went to his bathroom. It was tiled in sandstone and umber. The towels matched. He stepped into the hot, stinging spray of the shower, dropping his silken bathrobe behind him on the mat like a discarded flower petal. He took up a big bar of sandalwood soap and soaped the dark mat of hair on his chest. He washed under his arms, and then his legs and feet. Then he washed his arms and neck. He wished he could shampoo his hair, but that would get his bandage wet. So he had to not do it today. He rinsed the soap off himself, and then stepped out of his shower and toweled off. He was glad he kept his body in such good shape. Someday a woman would appreciate what good care he'd taken of himself, and the firm muscles that guarded his bronzed arms. Not many software developers cared what they looked like. Some of the software developers he knew looked like soggy mushroom people who had lived too long in the moist dark of their offices. Not Bruce. He knew that this was the only body he would ever get and that he had to take care of it. If not for himself, then for the love and admiration of the woman who would someday share its pleasure with him. He got dressed quickly. He put on Eddie Bauer taupe slacks and a shirt in a pale blue plaid. He pulled on a pair of black boots. He looked good in a rugged, outdoorsy way. You wouldn't have looked at him and thought, he's a computer software developer. You would have thought he was a forest ranger, and maybe even a mountaineer guide. He looked at the mirror and smiled a sad smile. Yes, he looked tough today. But he would have to be tough, too. He knew what he should do. He should go straight to Callie Archer. That would get him the information he needed. He'd be able to discover if his terrible car wreck and Henry Archer's terrible car accident were connected in any way. He tried not to think of Callie Archer as she had looked in the newspaper photograph. He would not think of her soft blonde hair in ringlets on her pale forehead, or her soft brown eyes staring out of the page at him. She would be well taken care of. That was what was important, wasn't it? That she didn't end up living out on the street now that her wealthy industrialist husband was dead. "Goodbye, Pitty Pat," he said as he left the apartment. "Meow," the cat replied. It was as much of an answer to his questions as Bruce Lucent would get that day. Georgia on my mind. This exhibit of the Mutant Museum was made possible by a grant from Break System BSC, Michael Maris, and viewers like you through Patreon. We have some really cool rewards if you want to become a Patreon supporter.